Welcome to episode 97 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Law Sky. It's February 5th, 1950, and today is about a word that sounds like a nickname until you realize it's a blueprint. GreNoLi. 3 surnames fused into one. Gren Nordahl, Liedholm. A Swedish trio at AC Milan, so famous, so coherent, and so lethal that football had to invent a single word just to say their names fast enough. And on this day, that word becomes a scoreline. Juventus 1, Milan 7. It's one of the most astonishing results in the history of Italian league football, and it lands at a moment when Italy, Europe, and the sport itself are rebuilding from war, trauma, and a sudden new reality, the global transfer market. Because GreNoLi aren't just 3 great players, they're an early warning of what modern football would become. Now, how did we get here? Post-World War II Europe is uneven. Some countries have cities flattened, economies shattered, and lives dislocated. But Scandinavia, relatively untouched compared with the continent's epicenters, has footballers who are fit, trained, and ready. And in 1948, the world sees them, the London Olympics. Sweden win gold, Denmark win bronze. And the tournament does something crucial. It puts Scandinavian football in front of a European audience that is hungry, traumatized, and looking for renewal. Italian clubs, in particular, are watching, because Italy too is rebuilding, but with a different kind of engine. Serie A has always had money and patronage, and Juventus, especially, have been tied to industrial power for decades. The Agnelli connection to Juventus goes back to the 1920s, and by mid-century, the club is already part of a larger economic ecosystem: factory city, national reach, big gates, and big expectations. And Italy has another advantage in the post-war moment. Football is a public spectacle people will pay for. Gate receipts matter. Prestige matters. And clubs are willing to pay for the kind of players who can turn Sunday into theater. So a new pipeline opens. Swedish and Danish stars, who were technically amateurs at the Olympics, can now become professionals. And Italy is one of the places ready to offer contracts that change lives. That includes Milan, who at the end of the 1940s have a problem. They're a giant in name, but they're living through a long drought. And that includes Juventus too, who on this very day field their own Nordic firepower, Danish forwards, including John Hansen, called Lange John or Long John, and Karl Parola. This is not just the Milan story. This is Serie A, mid-century, discovering the power of importing elite talent. And all of this is happening in a specific Italian context. Only months earlier, Italian football has been ripped open by tragedy. The Superga air disaster. Torino, the great machine of the 1940s, perished almost in its entirety. A dynasty vanished in fog. And when a dynasty vanishes, it doesn't just leave trophies behind. It leaves a vacuum, a psychological vacuum, a competitive vacuum. And Serie A in 1949-50 is played inside that absence. Now enter Milan's Swedish trio. Gunnar Gren, the connector, the thinker, the rhythm. Nils Liedholm, the brain with the velvet touch, the man who makes angles feel like invitations. And Gren Nordahl, the striker who turns those invitations into demolition. Together, GreNoLi. They arrive and immediately change Milan's identity. Not hard to beat, not pragmatic, but attacking, relentlessly, almost recklessly. They don't just win, they score. And by the end of this season, Milan will score 118 league goals, a number that still looks like a typo, and Nordahl is top scorer with 35. But on February 5th, 1950, those numbers are still in the future. What's in the present is a title race. Juventus on top, Milan chasing. And a match that, without anyone realizing it, will also become a media milestone. Because Juventus-Milan in Turin is transmitted on Italian television, experimentally, locally, one of the first televised Serie A matches. In other words, the first time many Italians see the league on a screen, they don't get a cautious 1-0, they get a flood. Now to the match itself. Turin, Stadio Comunale, about 65,000 people inside. And Juventus actually strike first. Early on, John Hansen scores. 1-0 Juventus. And you can feel the crowd settling into the logic of the league leaders: home, control, authority. Then the match breaks, not slowly, not politely. It snaps. Milan equalize almost immediately. Nordahl, Then something happens that is almost impossible in modern elite football. A team collapses in real time, while the other team keeps its foot on the accelerator, as if mercy is not part of the sport. In about 10 minutes, Gren, Nordahl, and Liedholm add 3 more. There you have it, GreNoLi. And after just 25 minutes of play, it's suddenly 4-1 to Milan, not after a long siege, but before the match can even breathe. Juventus is stunned. And when a big team is stunned, you start to see the difference between losing and unraveling. Because the best symbol of the unraveling arrives just before halftime. The captain, Carlo Parola, a Juventus icon, normally controlled, commits a violent foul born from frustration. He kicks Nordahl hard and is immediately sent off. That expulsion doesn't cause the disaster. That disaster is already in motion, but it captures the psychological moment. Juventus aren't being beaten, they're being run over. Then the second half becomes a public execution. Nordahl scores again, and Milan keep adding. Borini, Candiani, and by the end, it's 7-1. And it leaves behind those strange football artifacts that only exist after scorelines like this. One is the scoreboard itself. Another is that Milan's players received what was then a huge bonus for this statement win, 200,000 lire each, which comes out to approximately $15,000 in today's money. Yeah, I know. Remember, this is 1950. However you express it, the meaning is the same. This was not just a win. This was a performance with stakes, money, and message. Now to the aftermath. And here's the first twist. Juventus still win the league. This 1-7 doesn't derail their season. It embarrasses them, yes, but they respond like champions. And by the end of 1949-50, they finish 5 points clear. That matters because it tells you something about this era. Serie A is brutal, but it's also deep. One freak day doesn't always change the table. But here's the second twist. The match changes Milan's story anyway, because it becomes the proof of concept day for GreNoLi. The day everyone sees in one concentrated dose what this trio can do to a giant. And then, one season later, Milan win the scudetto, the first in decades, and GreNoLi become a permanent part of the club's identity. They also help Milan win the Latin Cup, the pre-European Cup mini-championship of the era, a reminder that before the Champions League, Europe still tried to crown itself. Now zoom out. Why should we care today? Because GreNoLi is an early version of a modern football truth. Great teams are often built around combinations, not individuals. The sport remembers Pelé and Maradona and Messi, but clubs are often defined by trios. And once you see GreNoLi, you start seeing echoes everywhere. In the late 1980s, Milan built another trio, again foreign, again transformative. Gullit, Rijkaard, and Van Basten. Different style, different era, different physiology. Same concept, a club importing a coherent nucleus that upgrades the entire machine. And between those eras, Italian football swings like a pendulum. In 1966, after the national team's humiliation at the World Cup, Italian football closes its border, no new foreign players. A ban that lasts until 1980. 14 years where Serie A turns inward, partly for development, partly for politics, partly for identity. Then the border reopens, and the modern flood arrives, the 1980s and 90s, when Serie A becomes the planet's richest stage. So GreNoLi sit at the start of a long cycle. They are the early proof that Italy would become a destination league, a place where global talent could be purchased, integrated, and turned into mythology. That is the final irony of February 5th, 1950. A match remembered for an absurd scoreline also sits at the beginning of football's biggest money story, television, the medium that turns Sunday into an industry. The first televised Serie A match many Italians witness is a 7-1 demolition powered by 3 Swedish imports. If you wanted a single image of modern football's future, you could do worse than that. Now before we close, 3 things to take away. First, GreNoLi matters because it's an early masterclass in chemistry. Gren connects, Liedholm controls, Nordahl finishes. It's football as a production line, and it's why a trio became a single word. Second, this match is a snapshot of Serie A's post-war transformation, a league rebuilding after tragedy fueled by industrial patronage and growing crowds, suddenly importing Olympic-level talent, and then broadcasting it on television as an experiment that will become the sport's dominant revenue stream. And third, Football history isn't only written by trophies. Juventus still won the title, but everyone remembers 1-7, because the matches that live forever are the ones that feel like the laws of the game briefly broke. On this day in 1950, GreNoLi turned Turin into a scoreboard hallucination. Milan beat Juventus 7-1. Nordahl scored 3. Gren and Liedholm added their signatures, and a Swedish trio helped announce the future. Imported brilliance, televised spectacle, and scorelines that become mythology. That's all for episode 97 of OTD, your daily dose of soccer history by 17 Lost Guy. If you have a favorite trio era, GreNoLi, the Dutch Milan, MSN, BBC, or any forgotten frontline that deserves a revival, email me at otd@17lawsguy.com. Tomorrow, in episode 98, February 6, 1958, the Munich air disaster, and the day football lost the Busby Babes. See you then.